First of all, I think I'm looking really damn good today. I just gotta say it. I think I look really buff when I wear the right kind of dress, and it's very gender affirming for me personally. I am in a yapping mood, and I don't have something I was like fired up, ready to talk about. Um, Off the top of my head anyway. But I do have a list of things that I'm like cooking on that I've been wanting to talk about, and I do think I'm prepared to talk about this today. So I'm doing a little audio check moment, a little pause, and we'll be right back with that. So I've been wanting to talk for a minute about my gender identity and gender identity in general. I used to be I don't know. It feels weird to say used to be because I still do this work, but I've changed my positioning on it. And so, like, the way I refer to myself and the way I think about the work, that all has shifted. And that's some of the work of labels, right? Is to, like, indicate, like, things you believe and to indicate groups you're part of and to indicate identity. But I find, especially coming from a English-speaking Western perspective, like, the taxonomy of language is always failing and is a constraint. It's a limitation. I am a critical theorist, so I specifically have understanding of gender theory, a la Butler, and Butler themselves has shifted on how they view gender and how they view sexuality throughout their time as a theorist. So I don't feel like it's really that surprising that me, random trans person on the internet, also had a shifting perspective over time. Because gender is something we have an unendingly altering relationship with. And I say it this way because of the process of becoming. Becoming is the process of slowly over time replacing parts and transitioning to a new state of being. You are becoming a new being. It's a transmogrification, it is a transformation, and I think this is what resonates so deeply with me as a trans person in my altering identity over time. As a multiplicity, my gender is in constant flux. But also just as a person, when we're aging, you don't feel the same way about your gender as a teenager as you do when you're 60 years old. Because the way you're presenting is different, and gender is a social construct. So the way we're presenting changes how we are interpolated by others, which in turn changes how they are understanding us and thus treating us. Interpolating is literally the way that others are receiving us and transforming that into an understanding of something, like whatever that is for them, just to define that. It's an internal process. So like the critical mind that is engaged, and like if you're the kind of person that likes to try and guess the end of a movie before you get there, that part of you that's like watching and doing meta-analysis, that's the part that does interpolating. And part of this interpolation is totally regardless of how we in the world are to ourselves, because we cannot know how others will receive us. But part of it is them picking up on the signals we're putting out, even if that means something different to them than it means to us. So identity is this thing that is completely unfixed, but we act here, especially in the States, like it's this fixed thing. And if you're treating your identity like it's fixed, you're probably stagnating. I also am a studier of Foucault, and I do think there are some limitations to the panopticon idea, but I find the idea of power being something that isn't inherently wrong. Like, there's nothing wrong with power. The problem is in its stagnation. It's pooling. Like water. If it does not keep moving, it becomes poison. You can't drink it. But when it stays flowing, it's healthy. That's good for you. You should drink that water. And power's the same way. You can't hold on to the power all the time. It needs to be in transition because not every situation requires the same kind of leadership. But if you approach all situations like they need the same kind of problem solved, like, you're gonna make more problems. There's an idiom here that I really enjoy, which is if you're holding a hammer, you view everything as nails. And I like it because it's indicating the way it's our perspective that is changing how things are being interpolated, more so than it's like actually an alteration of the object, or the noun rather. And that doesn't mean the thing isn't changing. It could be also. It could easily be both. But our perspective creates our world. There's so much information we are taking in all the time that we cannot possibly process. And so our brain decides what it wants to focus on based off of what we tend to focus on. That's how our brain constructs what is important. Your habits are what's important to you. So your habits are your values. That's why you have to watch them. What you do becomes what you are, as much as what you are becomes what you do. I don't mean to be esoteric. I just think that there are these phrases in our vernacular because they're trying to get at this truth that we don't embody very well. And I say all of this as a precursor to talking about gender identity because I have found such resistance within the queer community in having a shifting identity. Partly, I feel like my need to talk about this right now is because Pride happens in Portland in July. The city was like, hey, I know everyone around the world that's queer celebrates in June, but how about July? That's what we'll give you. So we get it in July here. So that means for me that I get 2 months of Pride because I am not going to let them take away June just because they don't want to do it until July. That's fine. You don't want to do 2 parades in a month and celebrate, black queers twice? Fine. Whatever, Portland. Regardless, it's Pride Month again. Pride Month to Electric Boogaloo, if you will. And I'm sick and tired of the biphobia, and I'm sick and tired of the way this also harms people in their exploration of gender. As a non-binary trans person who is transmasc, that is a mouthful. And I am read constantly incorrectly. I'm also disabled, so I have a hard time with transitioning. I can't bind because I have binding injuries from binding too much in my early 20s. I can't deal with my chronic pain also, or breathe in the heat when I'm binding. So my inability to bind already is setting up my to be read in a certain way. Regardless of any truth to do with me, I would love to be able to be flat-chested right now. I'd love to be able to do that, but I'm terrified of surgery and I cannot bind. So right now, this is what I got. This is what I have to rock with. I'm not going to alter my desire to wear certain outfits because other people think it means something for me to have a chest. It doesn't. It doesn't. And I am still just as trans for not being able to bind as someone who does and is able to. I identified exclusively as a trans man for a long time, and during that time I did what I would refer to as gender activism, and I was a trans activist. I still do advocacy work and I still do movement work, but like I said at the beginning, my position on all these things has changed, so the way I refer to myself within them has also changed. Like I just indicated, I refer to it as movement work now. I refer to myself as like an advocate because I can't really get down with the way activism as a term has been like so co-opted into the nonprofit sector, which is so beholden to billionaires. Like, they can't exist without billionaires, and so they are always bootlicking to them, and so we are constantly limited by them. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have them. In fact, I think having the things to complain about, having the issue of nonprofits that are trying to help but are also like dealing with the billionaires, and also having actual grassroots outside of the institution, non-beholden to billionaires, communities, having those interacting, and then having other things extending outward from them. I think that's good. I don't think we'll ever have a total solution to all of our problems. I think that's a total fantasy. But I do think we can find a way to like live together with all of our problems and not be murdering each other constantly. I do not think war is our natural state. I think a sense of scarcity is pushing us there, and it is a scarcity that is created by billionaires. So they're the problem. They're the problem. We can identify it. And then there's all these other things that are attached to that, like the reason why there are certain billionaires that all, generally look a certain way. That's the supremacy of it all. That's the white supremacy of it all. That's the anti-blackness of it all. And you might be confused about what all that has to do with what I'm talking about if you're completely uninitiated, and that's okay. I understand that we all need to start somewhere, and I am happy that you are here listening then, because I very, very, very much want to help bring more people along this path of understanding. Gender was constructed on a scale of anti-blackness. Meaning, the closer to whiteness you are, the more gender you get to have, because it is a privilege of whiteness. You don't get femininity unless you are white, which is why we have a reduction of black women, or even just women of color, like we saw with the Olympics. And I think Amani Khalif was her name. I'm gonna look it up to make sure I get it right, and I'll put it on the screen. But the way that people were being so transphobic about her was based off of how her body appears as a woman of color. So it's the racial read of her body that is then taking away her right to have gender. That's how this is all bound together. It sounds messy and doesn't make sense because the social construction of it didn't make sense. It's not logical. It's just what we're dealing with. And I think that's a confusion that is happening between like folks that are willing to listen but aren't necessarily initiated, and the folks that do know things about this but perhaps have been knowing them so long they've forgotten how to talk to beginners. And I think this is hooked up to the biphobia issue because we're seeing this turn to conservatism in our country. And it's a turn to fascism, as we know, which means there's policing increasing. So you can't be bi anymore. You need to pick if you're gay or not. You can't be trans. You have to pick what gender you are. You can't be non-binary. You have to be a binary trans person. Oh, you're not medically transitioning? Oh, then you must not actually care about it. It's policing of other people's living. Like we're trying to hold on to the scraps of dignity within an institutional system that we don't even subscribe to. Things have to fall apart so they can end. You don't get to die in perfect health, Like, we age and we fall apart, and that's on purpose. Things aren't meant to last forever. Nothing is meant to last forever. Our identity is meant to shift. I identified as a trans man, and I did gender activism, and I don't regret any of those things, and I don't feel any of them any less. And I'm not any less any of those things. I am now a different version of that. I identify as a trans non-binary person, loosely. But if anyone actually was asking me, and was willing to hear, the full spiel, I identify as a femme-FTM. This is partly because of the amount of women that exist in my system. So they identify with femininity, and they like that our body can express that sometimes. But I also have men in my system, and I also have non-binary people in my system. So we're not all the same gender expression, but externally we're often read femme, and my journey with gender is that I am transitioning from being scientifically labeled as female to engaging with some of the scientific aspects of masculinity. But also, that's made up too. The whole idea of science, that's another rant for another time. I'm not saying don't listen to science. I am saying always be skeptical, always check your resources, and perhaps read the papers yourself, read the knowledge yourself. I know it is harder to access it now. So I'm not saying this it's out there, Google is free. Fuck that. I hate that phrase. Google isn't free. It's stealing our information, it's stealing our water sources, and it's forcing AI down my throat, and I hate it. Google isn't free. And on top of that, resources that we've had for the last 10 years are being erased at the drop of a bucket. That information is not as easy to get its hands on. So I, again, do not blame you for not necessarily knowing. But I encourage you to try and ask other people if they maybe know where you can get the information. Because we're gonna need to pass it from hands to hands to hands. I have readings I'm happy to share. If anyone is curious about any of the things I said and is like, where the hell are you getting that idea from? I am happy to share some of the readings I've done that have been very, very enlightening with you, so you can read it yourself. I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want you to be curious and critical and keep your eyes open and your feet on the ground and not let someone else dictate reality for you. But I also want you to be open to things changing and being receptive to other people's opinions and perhaps to not even knowing yourself and having a shift in yourself and a shift in your own opinion. Or for the truth to just change because things change over time. Both things are true and they have to hold space together. My FEM/FTM identity is stated as such because of how other people interpolate me and how they treat me and how they read my gender. And so I'm rejecting the idea of taking on a gender identity by taking on this controversial, clashing identity. There's also the issue of sexualization here. Part of the reason why I'm tacking on the FTM label, despite the fact that it is this, term that is not what we're using as queer trans people out in the world these days, is because of the way I see it showing up online. I see it showing up in porn as that kind of category. I see it showing up in the transvestigators forums as that. The transmedicalists are still heavily using this. And so it's still reflective of the social consequence of where we are as a collective right now. Maybe I'll get to call myself something else one day. Maybe I'll get new language for it. I like to stay open to that. But I also don't like to police myself into being any one particular expression of anything. And my gender and how I feel it and the way I like to clothe my flesh should not be something that is dictated by other people or how they're gonna read me. So I choose failure. I choose not to pass as a person. I choose to be questioned and doubted by other queer people because I want to be actually free in my body. I'm pursuing liberation for me and for my doubters because I actually think that we deserve to get to be free in our bodies. I'm not free until we're all free, but I can't help other people get free if I'm not trying to live being free. We can't do it until we try it. We have to risk failure all the time. That is the only way to live. I feel like my gender identity is representative of that. I had to really stare failure in the face the last few years, and I had a brutal near-death experience in 2020. Not from COVID, but from something else entirely. And so it really made me aware of our total lack of control, and it was a big ego check for me. And since then, I've been very different. And it is really hard to explain that in a short-winded way. So I've accepted being long-winded. I've accepted the failure of small talk. I've accepted the awkwardness of things, and maybe I'll get better at them. Maybe I'll become different. I'm tired of not being good enough now, though. You know how I am? I'm tired of that not being good enough now for me. I am good enough for me now. I like myself now. I didn't for a long time, and it didn't make me a better person. It didn't make me happier. It didn't make people love me more. People treated me like garbage. My relationships all ended, and I felt alone and suicidal all the time. I feel happier as a failure. I'm happy to reclaim that term as a burnout, gifted child genius, you know? It's not something that we should be ashamed of. To fail is the bravest thing. especially if you keep up and keep trying, you know? Like if you get up off the ground after you've fallen down and you keep going again, did you even really fail, or did you just fall for a second? One of my heroes, which is a term I have a very difficult relationship with, but one of my role models, I'll say instead, is Yuzuru Hanyu, which was the Olympic champion of men's figure skating from Japan. He set record after record after record. The dude was a total beast on the ice. There was no one as good as him for a hot minute. Fortunately, you know, he's been very good at nurturing his fellow teammates and stuff. And so now, like, the Japanese figure skating team is... they cut. Like, that their work is tight. I don't know very many figure skaters that are as good as the Japanese team right now. And Yuzuru, during his last Olympics, because there's a time limit for your body, like after 27, the body can't really handle that kind of like labor and honestly like brutality that Olympians do to themselves to train. So after you're 27, that's sort of the end of your Olympic run. So he had his last Olympics, this last Winter Olympics, and instead of just nailing another perfect run that he totally could have done, he decided to do the impossible. When you're figure skating, they count the spins that you do in the air to give you more or less points dependent. So typically in men's figure skating for the last 15 or so years, quads, those are the standard. Those are 4 loops in the air before you land. Yuzuru has been trying to push himself to land 5 loops. I looked it up and it's a quintuple loop. He landed a quintuple loop instead of going for a perfect run that he totally could have done for his final Olympics. And he didn't land it perfectly. He had to step out of it. So that's in figure skating, you know, you have 2 little feetsies and you land on only one figure skate, and then that is considered proper landing. And if you have to land on both figure skates, or if you have to land and then step out of it, those are imperfect lands, but you still landed it, so it still counts for your points. That's what matters. In figure skating, it doesn't matter if you do it perfectly, it matters if you do it. And I think about that. I think about that a lot. He opted in his final moments of getting to do his Olympic career to, instead of do perfection, again, to push himself to do something ecstatic. I love that. That is the point. If all you're doing is preserving something that isn't working anyway and that will have to fail eventually, what is the point? I think identity is the same way. What is the point of demanding that you call yourself one thing until you die? We don't think of things the same way the entire time they're alive. We call the different stages of the life cycle different things. You know, if you look at the cycle of a tadpole into a frog, you know, we decide those are different creatures because they are at different developmental stages. But people aren't. I just think we're being silly about it. We're being silly about it because we're afraid of what it's like to be different. Do something you're scared of, that you've always wanted to do, and that you've not let yourself do because of how you thought other people would think about it. Live like you have nothing to lose. See what happens. That's my challenge for you. That's all I got today. That was kind of about my gender. It was kind of about other things. Definitely a lot of thoughts for you to think about. If you want some readings, hit me up. And I'll see you next time. Bye.